Hello and welcome back to another episode of NF2 and you. This is our last episode of the series, which we're really sad to be going, but it's been an absolutely brilliant journey talking to NF2ers, to specialists and experts in their areas. Today we are ending on really a nice fitting episode. The topic we're looking at today is looking at getting the most out of clinic and the clinics or the experience of attending clinics. And today we are joined by the amazing Juliette Buttimore. Juliette is specialist nurse practitioner and clinical lead of the NF2 service in the Midlands Eastern region. She's based at the Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge. Now, we're so lucky to have Jules with us today. She's contributed a ton of research to the understanding of NF2. So, Jules, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I'm very excited to be joining this fantastic podcast series. The episodes so far have been brilliant. They're such a good resource.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much. I want to start with the basics. We've got a lot to cover today because obviously there's so many things involved with the clinic itself. And so I want to look, first of all, at sort of the UK picture of the NF2 service. I know we've got the highly commissioned or the highly specialised commission service in England. Can you tell us a little bit about the sort of infrastructure of clinics and the relationships they have with each other?
Yeah, absolutely. So NHS England Highly Specialised Services commissioned this service back in 2010, and England and Scotland have direct access to the 4 hub centres based in England. So that's Manchester, Cambridge, Guy's in London and Oxford. And then there's various satellite units attached to those hubs. So we kind of, broadly speaking, split into kind of London area, East and Midlands, North, and then South and Southwest. It may be that people from Wales access those clinics, or it may be they're seen more locally, usually in Cardiff. And again, the separate commissioning arrangements for Northern Ireland. So it's whether they're seen in the Republic of Ireland or they may come across to the UK. Similar rules for Isle of Man and Channel Islands, I think, are the other people that tie in with NHS services. So most NF2ers in the UK will be followed up via one of the specialist clinics, and very rarely they'll be outside of that. But I think looking at our data, we see pretty much everyone. So that's the background to it. And the expectation, if you're seeing it as a hub, is that within that clinic and meetings, you will have access to a team of people who have expertise in management of NF2. So really that's looking at expertise in management of different kinds of tumours that we commonly see in NF2, and also that we have expertise in managing complications that we see with NF2.
In terms of the relationship between each of the clinics, is that something, I mean, do you communicate a lot? Do you have similar policies and ways of working?
Yeah, so there are some outcomes kind of as a group nationally that we are obliged to meet and review. And one of the beauties of having a specialist service like this, and certainly being a few years in, is actually at this point we know each other really well. We share a lot of data. You know, what a great resource we have in terms of looking at our patients as a group. You know, I think these things, they start as a very formal relationship, and as you develop them over time, it's sort of more informal, but you kind of have a lot more contact with each other. So it's been a huge benefit to us and a huge benefit to patients running in that way. Certainly, you know, we do meet and discuss, say, our outcomes, and services are not identical, but if you look at them, you'll see in terms of the expertise that we've developed that people get great outcomes regardless of where they're seen. So it's a real benefit, I think, for us.
Just touching a little bit there on in terms of broad similarities across the clinics. Obviously, the way the NHS is structured, each area will have different hospital trusts.
Yeah.
So does that impact that sort of similarity? Does that create differences between each of the clinics?
Yeah, I would say none of them are identical. I would say NF2 clinics, certainly if you're seeing at a hub, I would expect there to be kind of a core group of people involved. So I would expect ENT, neurosurgery and genetics or neurology to be involved. We would definitely have input from psychology and the ophthalmology team and genetic counsellors and specialist nurses. In terms of what you might see at a spoke or a satellite unit, if you're not seen in one of the main centres, you may not find you have access to all of those people when you come to clinic, but I would still expect them to tie in with the multidisciplinary team meetings that we have. And what I mean by an MDT meeting, if people aren't familiar with them, is prior to your NF2 clinic review, we will meet together as a group, and it will include some people who are not at your clinic. So, for instance, a radiologist will be there, or you may find sort of, for instance, other people dial into that meeting, whether it's plastic surgeons or ophthalmologists, and we will all review information together. So that will be scans and hearing tests and eye reviews and background from a social perspective and psychological perspective, so that by the time we see you, we have a good holistic and multidisciplinary take on where we think the next step might be.
In terms of the MDT, so I know the meeting that takes place before the clinic is sort of a wider base of the MDT. Yes. When patients sort of go to clinic, is there any sort of core disciplines that they will see in most of their clinic appointments? Or does that vary according to what's going on?
It does vary a little bit. I think we tend to find that you will have ENT or neurosurgery at the clinic, and quite often there will either be a geneticist or a neurologist. So you have somebody from a surgical background and you have somebody from a medical background. It may be that there's other people there as well. Usually the specialist nurses are tied in with the specialist clinics as well, and you'd see them there in person. As you say, there's some variation just by the very nature of hospital trusts. So in some cities, departments are split across different units. So it might be that audiology is actually in a different hospital from the one where the NF2 clinic is, or it might just be due to timetabling that a certain person can't be at the clinic, but that doesn't mean they haven't inputted into the MDT in terms of decision making.
In terms of the patient perspective of clinic,
so
obviously all of us with NF2 have a range of experiences that are similar and also different. And the frequency in which we attend clinic is also included into that. You know, some of us may attend it once a year, do your reviews, that's your job. And then some people may experience that they're, you know, attending clinic much more frequently. So is there sort of minimum amount of contact you would have from the clinic? Is it the 12-month annual reviews that happen every single year?
So for the vast majority of people, we'd expect once a year review. Some people will need more. Some people may request less, or we might say, actually, there's a very good reason why you don't need to come once a year. That's a pretty small group of people I'm thinking of. So I would say nearly everybody we would offer an annual review as a minimum.
And if a patient was feeling like, oh, I think something's going on in that time, is that quite easy for them just to contact the clinic and say, you know, I think I need a review? You know, within 3 months, 6 months, whatever. Is there sort of a process that patients can follow to do that?
Absolutely, yeah. And I would always encourage people to get in touch if they're concerned about a new symptom. And we're not too worried if you're not sure whether it's related or not. I think the main thing for us is to be informed so that we can have a joint discussion about it and make a decision as to whether we need to see you any sooner, or whether actually we think it's unrelated or it's not something to be concerned about. I would suggest the easiest way to do that, and the way that we're set up, would be to contact the specialist nurses in the first instance. They can probably advise directly, but if they can't, they certainly know how to get in touch with other members of the MDT, and then we can make a decision about whether we need to bring things forward. And what I'm really keen to avoid actually is, quite often people they're worried about getting in touch, and they think that maybe it's just a really silly question or it's nothing to worry about. And I think what I'd like to reassure people is we would always rather hear if people are concerned about a problem. You know, it's much better to know about something and say, actually, don't worry about this, it's fine, than it is to deal with something later if actually it was something after all. And also, I don't like people to sit at home being anxious when actually maybe we can just reassure them and it's a very quick thing to do. And then, you know, that's something that's dealt with, and hopefully you'd feel better and can move on from that.
I think sometimes we see this conversation going on amongst the community of people with NF2. It's people having this conflict between, do I go to my GP or do I go to my specialist nurse? And some people have amazing relationships with GPs who are really proactive, understanding NF2 and everything related to that. But obviously, they don't have the same specialism as the NF2 clinic itself. So, what would you say to people within that conflicted position?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are definitely conflicted, and I think people are really worried about contacting the wrong person sometimes, and GPs are fantastic in terms of general health, and understandably they don't have in-depth knowledge of rare disease because that's not possible in the context of all the rare diseases. So, I mean, I think if it's clearly obvious that it is not related to NF2, so for instance, you have sprained your wrist, or you have a urine infection or something, then of course see your GP about this. If it's a definite NF2 related issue like hearing or balance or seizure activity or something, then yes, I would suggest contacting your NF2 team. I think there's always going to be things that fall into the grey area in between where people aren't quite sure. And if you aren't sure, you can absolutely get in touch with the NF2 team and say, I'm not sure if this is related, could you advise? And we're very happy to say either not related, see your GP, or yes, actually, maybe this is related, let's look into it a bit more.
Just thinking, just going back to the clinic experience in itself, sometimes when patients are meeting with their clinicians, sometimes there's quite a lot of time restraints on there. I know from my own experience, that's improved dramatically over the years within the clinics of not feeling like it's a rushed experience, whereas years ago, particularly from my experience when I was attending clinic, it felt like, right, we're against time here, we've got to try and get all of this information in one go. And obviously there's still time restraints, but is there anything that patients can do to try and maximise the time they have with a specific clinician?
Yeah, I mean, I think being well prepared is really helpful in the sense that, so we will have scans available to us, for instance, and we will have information available to us like hearing outcomes or eye outcomes or other background information. But what we need is to be able to put that in context of you as a person. Because with NF2, one of the things is you might have a lot of tumours, you might have lots of things showing change, and there might be discussions about how to manage different tumours, for instance, or different symptoms. And it might be that there's quite a few options available to you in terms of treatment. And that's really complicated. And actually, sometimes we need to make decisions together about what's the best order to approach these, or actually what's having the most effect on your quality of life. So if someone can come to an appointment having thought about, actually, what is really bothering me of these symptoms at the moment? What would I like to find out today? You don't have to make any decisions when you come to clinic. I always think people should go away and think about things afterwards, but just sort of making sure you internally feel prepared so that you're sort of not overwhelmed by all the information when you come in is helpful. And I think sometimes it's just helpful to have an explicit discussion with your team as to how much information you would like, because some people absolutely want to know everything about every single tiny change, and some people will be like, no, just tell me the key message, I don't want to know everything. But we don't know that information unless we have that as a direct discussion, because everybody is different and preferences are all different. So I think to get the best out of us, it's sometimes good just to have an explicit, I'm clear that I would like all this information, or actually just tell me like a couple of the most important things and I'll come back to the other stuff later.
And I think there's so many issues within such an individual experience that it must be incredibly difficult for the clinics without any sort of pre-information about what people's preferences are to understand what actually how deep do we go into this, or how much information do we share? Because obviously you guys will have a wealth of information, that patients don't, it's not really relevant to the patient, or maybe it's too overwhelming for the patient. You find that quite a difficult experience as a whole? Do clinicians find this a difficult thing to try and find that balance?
Yeah, I think it gets easier as you get to know individuals better, because you get a better sense of what works in terms of information, kind of what kind of two-way communication do people like in terms of how much you talk about things and how you space that out. There's definitely a lot of nuance to it, but as a clinician, sometimes for us, you have to weigh up what information you're imparting and what order you do it in and what focus you put on different areas. And I think obviously you try to do that in a way where you avoid any of your own bias with what you feel is the most important thing to sort of look at first. I think so often you have to relate it back to symptoms and quality of life and not just looking at the pictures in front of you. So I think the more we can involve the patients in that discussion, the better.
Yeah. And I wanted to touch briefly on when people first start attending clinic, because I asked this earlier, and some people might be watching this, maybe they've just been diagnosed, they've not had their first clinic appointment or very early on in the clinic experience. When you very first attend your clinic appointment, I mean, do you meet everyone? Do you get an explanation? Is there some sort of welcome pack, or what should people expect the first time?
Yeah, I think coming into clinic for that sort of that first visit or those initial visits until you get to know people in the team a bit better is really daunting and can be quite overwhelming, especially if you are seeing, say, multiple people in the same room, or you're going from one room to another and sort of giving, not quite sure which bit of information to give to different people. So yes, we do generally provide welcome packs to people when they're first diagnosed. I suppose the balance with that is making sure that that's the right information for the time that you were diagnosed. And of course, there's many more things that come up later that you need to know. And it's just really how to effectively share that information and not overwhelm people at the very beginning. I'd always make contact with the specialist nurses. That's going to be your point of contact for clinic. They're all really lovely and very happy to speak to anyone and have this sort of vast knowledge of NF2. And I think we know all of the other national team members well, and everybody's very approachable and really wants to work holistically to get the best management for people attending. I always say that, difficult in the age of COVID, but bring someone with you just to listen in as well, take notes, ask to record things if that's helpful, if you want to listen to them later. We know people remember about 10% of what we say in clinics, so that's a huge amount of information that you might take in at the time that later on you're like, oh, what was that?
I know, for sometimes in my experience, it's quite an anxious situation as well. And so sometimes I walked away from clinic, I'm like, I don't remember anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then sometimes, of course, you might get certain information and that's all you focused on. I think, people understanding that you can have that ability to ask for notes, or you can take notes. Or you can record the session. It's really, really useful. One of the things I wanted to ask about when people are new to clinics, it's important from not a clinical standpoint, but from a clinician or a healthcare professional standpoint, to understand about what's going on in a person's life in terms of their life goals, their personality, their sort of things they're working towards in life. Is that important information for you to understand the patient as a whole?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's absolutely crucial to everything that we do. There's no point us suggesting treatment if, when it comes down to it, it does not work with someone's life and their life goals and their quality of life. And I think often in NF2 there are there's often more than one option. And if you don't really understand that person and their life, then you can't make a decision together as to what's the right route to go down. So it's really important for us to understand that.
Right, of course, so many questions. I'm trying to make sure people understand.
Well, yeah, I think I was just thinking, coming back to what
people attending clinic, what access and what rights to access do patients have in terms of their medical records?
So everybody has a right to access their medical records. There's different ways to access them. I would suggest, as a first off, and I would hope that this is done routinely, but do ask to be copied into any clinic letters about you, because then you can keep a file of evidence and records, especially if you're seen in more than one hospital or by different teams at different times. If there's particular information that you want that you don't hold already from that, then each hospital will have an access to records department. It's usually a case of filling out a form explaining what specifically you want, and then they should provide that back to you. And certainly our guideline is within 28 days, and I suspect that's quite standardised across other trusts. If you're seen in more than one hospital, I expect you would have to fill that out for each one. We're not allowed to share information from other hospitals directly. It has to be sort of governed by the hospital who owns the information. I'm very keen that people are just included in everything by default, because I would rather that people have access and ownership of their own information. One of the projects we've been working on in cancer care in the last year or so, which I think will spread out more in the NHS, is a right to me thing. So rather than writing to the GP and copying you in as a patient, the idea being we address the letter to the patient and then copy other people in. And that's working quite well in cancer care. And I think there's really good arguments for doing that. And sometimes it doesn't work. For instance, if it's sort of a very specific question about treatment that's directed to another clinician, but if it's a summary of your clinic appointment, I think that works quite well.
I guess that has quite an inadvertent impact on patient empowerment as well, actually, because they feel like they're a third wheel in the relationship with their own health. And, you know, it goes back to that whole ownership narrative that you pointed out there. In terms of medical records, what sort of things might people apply for or request?
So you might want a copy of your imaging if you've had MRI or CT scans. So Access to Record need to provide those because we directly have no way of putting them onto a CD or a file for you. Right. People sometimes want copies of histology from surgery or operation notes. If you're not copied into your clinic letters, you might want to have a copy of those, just so you have an accurate record of the outcome of that meeting. And you might remember it at the time, but you know how if it's like 2 months later, you'll be like, oh, what was that again? I can't remember what the plan was from this. So
do summaries of people's, I want to say health, but I mean specifically NF2 experience, are summaries of those kept on file. So if I was to say, do you know what, I need a letter that outlines my treatment for NF2 since diagnosis.
Yeah, so we tend to have MDT records, which essentially form the basis of our discussion for our team meetings, and that will have a summary of the most recent imaging, previous surgeries, whether someone's had a Avastin at any point, if they've had radiotherapy, if they have other particular treatments, it will all be on there. So we keep those as a summary, and sometimes I just give them to people directly, or if they want assistance with an application for a particular thing, say they would like a letter for PIP, then I tend to use that as a template and write a bespoke letter, because sometimes just that format of information is great for some things and not that helpful if you're sending it to someone who wouldn't know how to read it. So it's sort of just figuring out what's the right information to share in the right format and aiming it at your target audience, I think, if depending on what you want to use it for.
So, for example, you've got all these records within, the hospital where the clinic is based. Is that available for other hospitals? So if I was attending the Manchester clinic and that's where my clinical information was, and I ended up in hospital in a different location, would they have access to that same information?
Not necessarily. No. So there is no kind of national data set up for people to access NHS information from other hospitals. So I tend to say, if you're admitted to someone else in another hospital as an emergency, say, then you can provide the contact details of your team so that they can call for information. It's quite easy to transfer scans and things between hospitals. We can do that quite quickly. And again, it's quite quick to transfer letters and clinical information, but there's no automatic way to do that without requesting.
And in terms of patient access, again, I mean, obviously we're in the 21st century now. We all know that when we rock up at clinic, we see files this size, still variable. In terms of sort of electronic access, is there sort of portals that patients tell me? I'm thinking like at my local GP, I can register on a portal, I can make appointments, I can request prescriptions. Is there anything that exists for that in patients within clinic or within the hospitals that they're based in?
I can only really speak for our own hospital here, but I think generally hospitals are going in that direction. We've been paperless for 5 or 6 years now. And part of that includes a messaging facility where you can message your team directly rather than calling or emailing. Now, if you're copied into a letter, it appears on this portal rather than coming to you as a letter in the post. You can look up your appointments that are booked. So that's been something we've gradually built on, and it's just revolutionised everything. I think we're finally joining the modern world. We've even got rid of our fax machine now, so we're truly modern.
Forget the dial-up code.
Yeah.
I think it's brilliant, you know, because so many things are changing, and sometimes when we look at, you know, governmental institutes or, you know, the health service as a whole, it's usually quite a little bit behind technology-wise, you know, or scientifically wise, we're like storms ahead, but technology-wise on that basic interaction, so that's really positive to hear. And you mentioned about other hospitals sort of going in that direction. Am I right in assuming then that it may be a unique thing that Cambridge has set up there?
No, so our system is used in other hospitals in the UK, at least 2 that I know of, but it is not the case that the NHS is signing up to use that one system everywhere. It's down to the individual trust decisions. So, for instance, when I go and do my clinics in satellite centres, they will have an electronic system as well. I haven't been anywhere with paper notes for a while, but it will not be the same electronic system. It's still better, I think. You know, it's quite often, there's no overarching infrastructure, and quite, you know, and I think with a lot of these systems, they are very much building in patient portals so that people can access information directly, because that's clearly better for patients and it's much better for us as well. We want people to access their information in a clear and easy way.
You know, I want to talk a little bit more about the specialist nurse role. Before we do, I've got one more question around being at clinic itself and the experience of that. Obviously with NF2, some people with NF2 experience hearing loss or communication difficulties. So what rights, first of all, do patients have in terms of having access, communication access? What communication access is on offer? And then thirdly, how do people request that? Is it an automatic thing or do they have to ask for it?
Yeah, so I would definitely recommend that people ask for it. And it may be as we get to know you, then we know that something needs to be arranged. But I would always err on the side of caution and say, please tell us what you need. And then we are the ones who will then organise things. In terms of accessing NHS services, you're absolutely entitled to whatever communication support you need to make your appointment accessible to you so that you fully understand the information that's being discussed. And it might be that that's CART, or it might be that that's BSL or a lip speaker or whatever option suits you. So for us, whatever that request is, we have a centralised booking team and we will ask them to arrange it. I think one side of that obviously is sometimes people don't know that there's options available to them that would make their appointments better. And I think that's definitely the case with CART and sometimes with lip speaking as well. So sometimes there's just, I think on our side of things, we are trying to raise awareness to people that these options exist, because obviously if you don't know it's an option, you won't ask for it. And
this is and I think it's one of those real struggles, isn't it? Because if you don't know that they don't know, they don't know if they don't know what to ask for. So it's very sort of, it goes back to that whole balancing act as well, isn't it? And the whole getting to know each other. I think, you know, I've seen such an increase of that within the last year, particularly, whether that's just because it's voiced a lot more now, we're talking about it in conversations. But I know for me, I've never really had issues getting access to an appointment within my NF2 clinic. Millions of issues in any other health department.
Absolutely.
In the NF2 clinic, it's sort of very, very well respected. But I was obviously in a privileged position that I'd worked in the communication industry, so I knew about what was available. I already knew what worked for me because I worked with those professionals in my work environment. And like you say, some people are just not aware of what options are there, you know. And when we look at CART, so I call it just STTR, but that's just you know, that's just different acronyms. But with speech to text, I think because there's such a lack of awareness of how that works and about it being widely available, you know, for NHS appointments, and also a valid communication support in its own right. And I think most people sort of societal wise think death equals VSL.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
so there's this massive misconception. I don't use VSL, so there's not going to be any communication support for me. So I think it's brilliant that there's more awareness raising around this issue, you know, particularly people sort of going, oh, so you can get speech to text that's done by an actual person, you know, so it's more accurate, you know. And I know there's a lot of conversation going on between sort of speech to text apps and, you know, auto captions and things like that. And that's for a whole separate conversation. But it's really good to see this conversation happening so that we can start to build that awareness in understanding, okay, there's a communication barrier here, not that the team don't have anything to offer, not that the team don't know what's on offer, but there's kind of, we don't know what you need and you don't know what you need. So you've got to find yourself in this no man's land, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, you know, this is an example of where it's really important for patients to be empowered and able to advocate for themselves in terms of, this is the communication support I need for an appointment. Because, you know, I think the NF2 clinics, as you say, we're good at that. We understand what the options are. If someone asks for something, we'll know what it is. But actually, you know, people have to go to clinic appointments at other hospitals, or they might have an appointment with another team because they have an unrelated problem, or it's something that isn't directly related to NF2. And then this is going to be very unfamiliar to them. And they may need a bit of guidance and support with, you know, this is what I need and this is how it usually works.
And now we've touched on advocacy, I want to talk specifically about the specialist nurse role.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit about that, sort of what the role is, what people can expect from that? Because really it's so all-encompassing, you know. You've got direct point of contact, you've got pastoral support, you've got support with letters, the practical side of things, you know, advice, all of these things. Can you sort of just explain a little bit more around the role?
Yeah, so I think looking at the main things that we do, one, we're there as a care coordinator in terms of making sure that things get tied together so that they are organised in the right order at the right time, in the right place. Because NF2 often involves a lot of different teams, and we're trying to make that as less, you know, the least complicated that it can be, I think. And that needs someone to facilitate that. We're also the primary point of contact, because I think one of the things with NF2 is you don't want to be trying to contact 30 different people about your problem and you're not quite sure who it should go to, but actually you just want one person to ask the question to and then leave them to sort that out. Okay. We definitely provide other support. So for the younger NF2ers, we'll dial in and join school meetings, or we might be involved in writing EHCPs for people who need additional support kind of at school, or if they're at university, they might need additional support with education, or we might need to liaise with people's workplaces if they need some kind of guidance. We'll help with things like PIP letters, and people who want to apply for hearing dogs, we can help with those applications. We can signpost on to other areas. So I wouldn't give direct benefits advice, but I would signpost people onto the right person to give it. We can make referrals. So for instance, I would refer people on to other teams like palliative care or their local hospice should they need it, or other services that seem appropriate. We will link people in with the psychologists if they need a review from mental health or emotional perspective. So I think we cover quite a lot of things, really. And I think, I mean, the key thing for me is just knowing that patients have a person they can contact outside of that clinic appointment. And they do have a way of contacting someone to say, I'm worried about this. Can you advise or can you help?
And, you know, I kind of feel in the same way from personal experience again, but I know this resonates across so many patients, is having that point of contact. And I think sometimes, particularly maybe for patients who remember pre-clinic days, when you were organising all of your own support, you were directly contacting everyone's secretary, you were having that argument, waiting list conversations, trying to push for your own, care and all these things. And of course, it was a very stressful situation.
Absolutely.
And then the whole game changed when the clinics came on board. And I think the impact alone of having one single point of contact is so profound. You really can't put that into words to describe just how much support comes from the specialist nurses as well. And I really, really love that you've touched on sort of emotional impacts there as well, because I know nurses provide such a great pastoral care and provide an advocacy role. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so specialist nurses have a level of psychological training sort of inbuilt into their job plans, and it may be that we speak with someone and that's the level that's appropriate. It may be that actually we feel that sort of some more detailed work is involved, and we're very lucky in that we have psychology built into the NF2 service, so there are psychologists linked with the hub centres, and they may not necessarily see people at the satellites, but they can make onward referrals if that's the case. And I think there's so many issues with NF2 and how we manage them and how people interpret that relate to your own personal history, your family, your experiences with diagnosis, your experiences of symptom management, and your kind of disease course and different treatments. And, we don't come into life having all of the skills that we need to manage that. And this is where the psychologists are really helpful in terms of being able to talk through your past experience and where you're at now and help you to develop skills that kind of end up improving your quality of life and how you feel about your disease and your symptom management. So I think, again, this is something with the specialist service that when I work with people with other tumour disposition syndromes, that doesn't exist in that easy access way. We're so very lucky to have it. And I think there's an absolute clear need for it. NF2 is a very complicated condition and presents a lot of different challenges for people. So I always encourage people to make use of this support. I think everybody benefits from it.
And I think what's brilliant about it being attached to the NF2 service as well is, we look at the climate of mental health support across the UK widely in the NHS. It's not ideal, no. And, we see the stats about waiting lists. We see all these experiences about needing a huge amount of improving, funding being ring-fenced, all of these things. And I think what's fantastic about the service being attached is actually it's just from a patient's perspective, it's a quicker, easier route to go. And also because the complex things can arise psychologically from NF2 and the experiences of treatment and whatnot. Yeah, it's actually going almost straight to the top. Support,
And it is also nice not to have to go into that relationship and go, and I have NF2 and this is what it is. And I'm going to tell you about it, but you probably don't really know about it. And you've already started from somewhere where there is some understanding of what needs you might have in terms of communication or your background or your experiences. And I think that's very helpful.
And also, I have an interest around medical trauma. And I think if you went to someone who didn't have an understanding of NF2 and the treatments that accompany it, you maybe won't particularly have that level of knowledge around the medical trauma that can be experienced in that journey. How would, there are circumstances, for example, if a patient is in a clinical appointment, they're with a neurologist or their neurosurgeon, maybe they feel a bit overwhelmed at that point to say, I need a little psychological support. It's a huge conversation for anyone, NF2 or not. Yeah. Could they request that support? Could they do that over email, contacting the nurse?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it is, you don't necessarily want to be in a room full of, 5 people, say, and be like, hi, I'm struggling. Actually, I need a bit more here. I think that can be, you're exposing a lot of yourself to say that. So there's definitely no obligation that you have to tell us in person at your clinic appointment. I think you should do it by whatever format you're most comfortable with. So you can speak to the nurses after your appointment, you can drop them an email, quite often we ask people to fill out quality of life questionnaires or core 10 questionnaires, and there'll be options on that to check a box or not to say, actually, I would like to be contacted by the psychologist. So you may not even kind of have to directly have that conversation. And it may be, you know, sometimes we might suggest it to people without them having asked, because it's really important to check in with people and go, you know, hi, this is a really difficult situation you're in here. Would you like to talk about it some more?
I think it's such a great way to sort of remain a little bit anonymous as well. You have this kind of feeling of anonymity when you're filling in a form just saying, I'd like to see a psychologist, you know. And, you know, like you say, there's so much vulnerability with just understanding you need support and asking for help. I think it's such a huge thing. So yeah, everybody watching that feels like they're struggling emotionally or there's any specific issues that are affecting your day-to-day life, please get in touch with your nurses, or, you know, send them an email, say inkling or whatever you're most comfortable with. I want to talk a little bit more about the sort of NF2 ecosystem, if you like, and I'll use this sort of phrase, but what I mean by that is sort of the direct ecosystem with clinics, gateway community organisations, and then the community themselves. Is the relationship with the clinic and those other organisations and the community as a whole? How important is that to the clinic?
It's really important. I think it's so crucial to us to be engaged with other support organisations, whether it's having patient representatives for your own service, which we do sort of say if we're developing leaflets and such like, and that wider contact with either charities or support groups. So, for instance, we would work with Nerve Tumours UK. So we have a close working relationship with them because they have the specialist practitioners, and quite often they are funded to work within NHS trusts. So I work very closely with one of the nurses who's based in Birmingham, for instance, and it would be the same for any of our networks. And we would therefore kind of regularly participate in writing information for their newsletter or their website, or if people run information days, then we would speak on those. I think because we've developed quite long-term relationships, you know, not just with Nerve Tumours UK, with Can You Hear Us and NF2 Biosolutions, then I would, if I had a question about something, I would now just probably ask, to be honest. Like, there's lots of informal two-way communication as well as these formalised events. I think, you know, we all like to look at things from the wider community perspective and a more holistic perspective. And one of the things that I oversee as clinical lead is this kind of the patient involvement session that we have as part of our annual review meeting with NHS England. So I will invite people from Can You Hear Us and NF2 Biosolutions, Nerve Tumours UK to dial into that section of the meeting so that we can all have an update on what everybody's been doing in the past year, and if there's any particular new concerns, and if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask, or if they would like to say, actually, we'd really like you to look at this thing, then that's a really good opportunity for us as a group to all discuss it together as well.
And I guess sometimes patients may not feel able to give the feedback that they want to. I mean, there's lots of opportunity. Of course, you've got the core questionnaire, you've got the quality of life, you've got the relationship you have with your nurse. We've seen some people have a more formal relationship with their clinics. I guess maybe attending less or not having as long a relationship. They maybe feel a little bit reluctant to give their feedback to clinics. So, I mean, that seems like a good way for all three organisations. You know, if anybody is feeling like they want to throw some feedback, to get in touch with whatever organisation they, you know, they're or they're in the community of, or whatever.
Yeah, and I think, you know, if there's feedback and people aren't comfortable to give it directly, then of course, you know, we're always very happy to have feedback via whatever route. And I think, you know, we all benefit from that. So encourage people to share it. And I suppose separately from quality of life and core 10 and things that we look at like that, there's also the experience of clinics in general. And that doesn't really relate to your quality of life as such, but it does relate to your experience of the service. And that's something that we've all kind of analysed as individual hubs, but at the moment what we're trying to do is collate it so we have kind of a more of a uniform approach to the whole cohort of NF2ers that use the service. And, you know, can we standardize that to really get a better in-depth understanding of experience of clinic from the patient perspective? So that's something that, well, has been slightly on hold because of COVID this year, but we have been making progress on, and that's something that I'm quite, I'm keen to explore further.
Well, I've got you actually. What is the latest situation with COVID across the NF2 clinic service?
Yeah, I mean, I think like everyone, we've definitely experienced significant delays in terms of being able to access scans, in terms of being able to access hearing tests and eye reviews. And I do think in terms of routine follow-ups, we're starting to get there, but it may sort of take a bit longer for things to get back to normal as such. And I think some of the things from COVID-19 actually has really helped the NHS in the wider sense that I think actually our virtual technology has kind of had to move on a lot quicker than perhaps it would have done otherwise. So I think certainly for us, actually, we'll probably keep some of our video appointments and telephone appointments, and make, one of the things about having a specialist service is we really appreciate how far people have to come to see us. And there's some things that you can't replicate without seeing someone face to face. We don't have a good way of looking in someone's ear or doing a neurological assessment if we don't see you in the flesh. But there are other things that we can do over a video call and advise on. And actually, if we can save people the kind of inconvenience and the cost and the stress of coming in to have a face-to-face appointment, if it's not needed when they live a long way away and they may have disabilities that make traveling very difficult, then that's a fantastic step forward for us. I think that's something where we will have to work a little bit with patients on an individual level, because I tend to find that people have preferences either way as to what works for them.
I think, when you touched on there as well, in terms of the travel to clinics, for some it's really extensive, for some it's not that far at all. And I think, from a patient perspective, is having that ability to say, do you know what, if it's not needed, I'd rather have a video call. And the technology is there. Like you say, it's been such a heap of learning through COVID as to what works, and getting new technologies in place as well. I know we're running out of time very, very, very quickly on this last one. If you had the most specific advice or the best advice about how people can prepare before they come to clinic, what would you advise to people?
What I would say is think about what's affecting you at the moment, and that might be your physical health, it might be your emotional, mental health, it might be it might be social issues. I don't want to be prescriptive on that. You will know what is affecting you. We will have information about you that we can tell from looking at the information that we have, like scans and hearing tests or whatever is relevant. And we would like you to help us put that together so that you go away from that appointment knowing your current the current status of things and what the plan is next and what to do if you have queries before we see you again. That would be kind of my main summary. We want everybody to get the best out of that appointment, and if you've prepared for that, then I think we can work together to achieve that.
And in terms of, because some people before they attend clinic will have a heap of questions they want to ask, and then they get there and it all goes blank. Do you sort of advise regularly to patients to write down any questions that you have in advance so that you can come a little bit more prepared to the clinics? Yeah,
I think that can be really helpful for some people, and I think it's quite individualized. And I think as an NF2er, you become more skilled at it, don't you, the longer you've been coming in some ways. But there's always the ability to get completely sidelined by a new piece of information when you're not expecting it. So yes, I think if you notice particular things, sometimes with symptoms, it can be useful to say, keep a diary. You think, I think I'm getting more headaches than I used to, but I'm not really sure. Actually, keep a record, because then we have something to kind of really keep track of it by the time we see you. If you know that you have a question and you might forget it, do write it down in advance. I mean, I don't want people to think that they can't ask a question after their clinic appointment and it's finished and that's the end. I would always say, if you think of something afterwards, we will still answer it, just to get in touch. But obviously, ideally, it's better to have a two-way discussion at the time of the appointment, but it's not a fixed point in time where it's finished and that is the end. We can always come back to things.
I know it's not like, okay, off you go, bye now, we'll see you.
I'm sorry, we're finished.
Patients can feel quite comfortable if they've got questions, because like you say, you might go with questions and then you might get news of something growing or whatever, and then you go away, you do research, you want to understand a little bit more, you may have questions at that point, and that's okay. Feel just try and contact the nurse for that.
Yeah, no, I think people should do that. I think, you know, sometimes it's this complicated information. You don't know what that information is going to be until you get there. You're not getting forewarning of your results a lot of the time. So you can't expect people to have their results, assess that result and what they would like to do at the same point in time. I think you need time to digest it and figure out actually, you know, what is going to work here? What is the best option in my life? So I think I would expect people to think about things. I would never want anyone to be on the spot with feeling they have to make a decision straight away.
Brilliant stuff. Honestly, that was really informative, and I think we've dripped every little bit of information we can out with you as well. Honestly, Jules, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on.
All right, folks, this is the last and final time you will see this beautiful face. I just want to say, on behalf of the Kenga Heroes team, thank you so much for watching the episodes. Thank you so much for your feedback. It's really, really fantastic. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We'll also be putting more videos on various things, news and information going forward. There are now 16 episodes in this short series of NF2 in you, so please do go check them out. We've got a wide range of topics in there for you. They will be there forever now, so use them that you will. All right, thanks. Take care of everyone.